Welcome to the Patriotic Pulpit. I am Bill Lockwood. I received an article the other day, the Imprimis magazine. I hope you get the Imprimis magazine. It's really a great short read once a month. It comes from Hillsdale College and it involves the Constitution, conservative thinkers, conservative writers. And this issue, February issue, I think was one of the greatest that I've read in a long time. And that is because the writer of it, Heather McDonald, she is one of the clearest thinkers in America, in my view. She is from the Manhattan Institute, and she wrote an article, I guess it was part of a speech actually, in which she called, or it was entitled this, Disparate Impact Thinking is Destroying Our Civilization. Now, what does it mean, disparate impact thinking? Disparate impact means that practices in employment, housing, education, even law schools, medical schools, military, pilot training, the jobs market, and even incarceration. Any practice that adversely affects one group more than another group is a disparate impact, that it has an impact upon one race more than another. Let's take, for example, an illustration that probably not many people use, but I think is probably commonsensical, and that is, let's take a sports organization, the National Basketball Association. The NBA is made up of 76% black, 16% white, but it has an A-plus rating when it comes to disparity. How is that the case? How could that possibly be? Because the racial makeup in America is that blacks make up only 13.6%. So we have let's say it's 14% black in America, yet 76% black in the NBA. And yet, that does not reflect the racial makeup of America, and yet they get an A-plus rating on racial disparity. What is the case here? Well, the case is that it is assumed by the NBA that they're taking only the best basketball players, and I assume that, of course, is probably the case. They simply want quality. They want people who are able to play basketball, and they have excelled in that, and so we have 75% makeup of blacks. But people don't look at it that way when it comes to the jobs market, when it comes to military training, when it comes to such things as medical school, getting into medical school, into psychology advancement programs, programs that are in psychology that are graduate programs. They don't look at it that way. Instead, if they see racial disparity, that is, that less blacks are represented in those particular fields, then that assumes, the assumption is that we have some kind of racism at work here, because if we don't have at least 13.6% black in the medical field or graduating as heart surgeons, then we're going to say that, well, we must be racist. On the other end of it, turn it around, if we have more than 13.6% blacks incarcerated, then people say, well, that means we're racist. As a racist society, systemic racism is the reason that we have more than 13.6% black incarcerated. That is because the blacks, of course, make up about 13.6% of the population of America, but we have more than that in the prison. So any racial disparity outside of sports is assumed to indicate racism in America. Now, that's what Heather McDonald is talking about in her article. So she begins her article this way, and I cannot help but share her article. It's just a great article. I want to talk about the introduction to it, and then I have a couple of things I want to say regarding going on right here in Texas, the classroom, juvenile detention, incarceration, those kinds of things, and what's taking place in the classrooms across America. And then we'll come back to what Heather McDonald had to add to it. And of course, she probably knows about all of this. She didn't include that in her article, but these are some things we want to simply add to it from the public school system. She begins her article saying the most consequential falsehood in American public policy today is the idea that any racial disparity in any institution is by definition the result of racial discrimination. I could not agree with her more. If a cancer research lab, for example, does not have 13% black oncologists, the black share of the national population, It is by definition a racist lab that discriminates against competitively qualified black oncologists. If an airline company doesn't have 13% black pilots, it is by definition a racist airline company that discriminates against competitively qualified black pilots. And if a prison population contains more than 13% black prisoners, our law enforcement system must be racist. So the claim that racial disparities are proof of racial discrimination has been percolating in academia and in the media for a long time. And after the George Floyd race riots of 2020, however, it was adopted by America's most elite institutions, from big law, big business, to big finance. Even museums and orchestras take up the cry. So that's how she begins her article. So let me just back up for a few moments and talk about one area that is right here local. I'm in Wichita Falls, Texas. This is North Texas. And this is happening in Texas. There is an organization in Texas called Texas Appleseed. It is the Texas Appleseed Project. Basically, it applies socialism, the same thing that we've been talking about, to the classroom and juvenile justice. Now, Texas Appleseed bills itself as an Austin-based public interest justice center to change unjust laws and policies involving juvenile justice. Specifically, the nonprofit organization works to dismantle unjust laws that, quote, unduly burden historically undeserved Americans. So we have unjust laws unduly burdening historically undeserved Americans. They're speaking, of course, of minorities, particularly the black population. They mean, of course, the minority children who are undeservedly being punished, they say, with a school systems at a higher rate than white children. Now, is it true that minorities are punished at a higher rate than whites? Yes, it is true. But the assumption, and they don't want anybody to call their hand on it, they don't want anybody to question it, because they're thinking that no one's going to be bold enough to question it, as Heather McDonald has done, and as I'm doing right now, and that is, the assumption that they're basing this upon is that the reason that there are more blacks that are punished out of the school system is because we have systemic racism in the white population, the white majority in Texas. And that is that which I dispute. And we'll talk about that as we go along. So the Texas Appleseed last year, I guess it was actually 2 years ago, sent a letter to the Dallas ISD. And the Texas Appleseed wrote this: according to the data from the Texas Education Agency, 6,800 black students and 5,900 Latinx students were suspended out of school from the Dallas system during the 2018-2019 school year, as compared to only 363 white students. All right, what's the assumption? The assumption is that the reason there is so much racial disparity is because of systemic white racism in the white population. Black students, it is pointed out, represented 22% of the DISD student population, and yet they accounted for 46.7% of the out-of-school suspensions. So we have disparity. 22% of the Dallas school system, black. Yet 46, almost 48, or 47% of the out-of-school suspensions are among the black students. So this disparity is enough supposedly to prove that the educational and the juvenile justice systems are systemically racist against minorities. Now, to enhance this charge, the Texas Appleseed Project freely and frequently quotes the specter of George Floyd's death at the hands of police. And this is what this is all about, so they say. Well, let's talk about it for just a few moments. Texas Appleseed reflects what is called the JDAI program. That's the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative. JDAI program that was championed by the Annie E. Casey Foundation. As a matter of fact, the Annie E. Casey Foundation is found on the Texas Appleseed materials, and for many years, the director of the Annie E. Casey Foundation, now its current consultant, was Bart Lubau. Who's Bart Lubau? Bart Lubau was a member in the 1960s of the SDS, that is, Students for Democratic Society. That's a communist front organization from the 1960s. And like other Marxist-oriented agitators, such as the Barack Obamas of the world, Lubao, through the JDAI program, will, now here's the quote, require states to work to reduce the disproportionate representation of minority juveniles in secured facilities. So what's the problem? The problem is too many minorities are being punished because of white racism. The solution? Revamp the detention incarceration procedures as well as school suspensions along social justice lines. We've got to equal it out. But I started with the National Basketball Association. Isn't it interesting that we don't want to do that with sports? We don't want to have that racial disparity equal the racial disparity in the population when it comes to sports and when it comes to achievement in athletic fields. We don't want to do that. But it happens to be, in this case, the juvenile detention system. So we'll talk about that a little bit more when we come back. We'll take a break. We'll talk about social justice in this juvenile detention system, what's happening. Then we'll turn our attention pivot once again, and look at Heather McDonald's article. We're looking at disparate impact thinking that's destroying our civilization, taking the title from Heather McDonald's fabulous article in the Imprimis magazine. She's from the Manhattan Institute. And we've added to it some things regarding juvenile detention. But let's just back up for a moment, take a wider scope view of social justice. Social justice that you've heard from Barack Obama and Joe Biden and everybody else in the Democratic Party has very little to do actually with justice, but focuses attention upon outcomes. Social justice advocates cry continually about unequal distribution of properties, unequal distribution of money, unequal distribution of college degrees, and even jail sentences. And now, school discipline is supposed to be meted out, according to the Texas Appleseed Project, by racial quotas. The late Walter Williams observed regarding social justice, and I want you to listen to this statement. Walter Williams, great thinker, late Walter Williams died maybe about 2 years ago. Outcomes, he says, of human relationships are often seen as criteria for the presence or absence of justice or fairness. Outcomes frequently used as barometers of justice and fairness are race and sex statistics on income, unemployment, income distribution in general, occupational distribution, wealth ownership, and other measures of social economic status. In other words, no attention at all is paid to any underlying reason for differences among people of different races. Social justice simply assumes, there's the operative word, that different outcomes among different peoples, different races, is the result of class prejudices, favoritism, white racism. That is the unspoken assumption of the Texas Appleseed. That is, they are saying that the reason that more black students are incarcerated or have out-of-school suspensions in the Dallas system or in the systems all across the state of Texas is because of systemic racism in the white majority population. But what social justice advocates and Texas Appleseed warriors refuse to consider is that differences in behavior among peoples, races, and subcultures is the result of diverse habits, personal choices, cultural preferences, and moral values honored by various groups in America. There are different values that people honor in different classes or different segments of society, and even among different races, different values are honored differently in a different system. Just for example, out-of-wedlock birth rates for different racial and ethnic groups in 2008 was just over 40%. The breakdown in that statistic shows that among white non-Hispanic women, out-of-wedlock birth rate was 28.6%. Hispanics was 52.5% in black. Among the black young people, the figure jumps to a startling 72.3%. How is that the case? That's racial disparity. There's differences in the races here. But why is that the case? Is that because somehow there's racism in one segment of the population as compared to the other? How about abortion? 2005, the abortion rate for blacks in the United States was almost 5 times that of white women. Similar disparities are found in almost every measurable statistic. It is clearly evident that minority cultures are fostering, unfortunately, immoral lifestyles to an alarming degree. It would be expected from these types of statistics that school disciplinary problems will fall along the same racial lines, and that is exactly what we find. And that is to say that minority cultures, in and of themselves, too frequently foster immoral lifestyles, whether it be single-parent households, abortion, and out-of-control students in the classroom. Now let's pick up Texas Appleseed just again. It assumes that the higher discipline rate in school experienced by minorities creates what they call the school-to-prison pipeline. And the underlying assumption here is that the schools themselves, which are by their prejudices against minorities, are helping to manufacture tomorrow's criminals. This is completely outlandish and unfounded. Here's a TA, Texas Appleseed letter to the Dallas Independent School District from 2.5 years ago. Quote, through the use of exclusionary discipline and school policing, thousands of young Texans are pushed into contact with the criminal legal system each academic year from conduct that occurs in their schools. What's the message? Quit punishing kids. Quit punishing them, especially minority students. It is the contact with the criminal legal system that's causing misbehavior. Reality is completely different. Our schools are becoming war zones, even at the elementary level, and not merely from outside influences. Children themselves are becoming violent, more violent, completely disrespectful of adult authority, disdainful of private property and the personal liberty of other people, illicit sex, out-of-wedlock births. They've become normal. Sexual assault on school property is an issue. Drugs of all kinds are commonplace in the halls of learning. Gang activity dominates some schoolhouses, and teachers are being assaulted. Right here in Wichita Falls, teachers have been carried out on stretchers. Bedlam actually reigns in many schools. Teachers are fleeing classrooms, and the rest are just trying to survive. Why is that the case? The majority of it stems from a minority population where it is most common for a child to grow up without a loving discipline or direction from a father. No, Texas Appleseed, it is not a school-to-prison pipeline. It is a fatherless home-to-prison pipeline. The children are coming from homes into the school system with unprincipled conduct. Most frequently, removal from an unruly student from the classroom, from the school itself. That's the only alternative to have any kind of peace in the classroom at all. Now, this is going on all across the country. This kind of thinking happening in the public school system. For example, in New York City, public school students are caught stealing, doing drugs, attacking someone. You can attack someone and avoid suspension under the new progressive guidelines. Instead, they will be sent to a talking circle where they can share their feelings. A 2015 article read this way: every reasonable effort must be made to correct student behavior through restorative practices. That's restorative justice, that is. Restore them back. Okay, give them a talking circle. Give them a chance to talk it out. This is a 32-page discipline code in the New York City public schools. So they're not going to punish them any longer for even assaults or destruction of private property in school. They're going to have a talking circle. Chicago Teachers Union complained that restorative justice practices left teachers struggling to control unruly kids. And then, at that time, the mayor of Chicago was Rahm Emanuel. He announced the school was moving away from zero tolerance policy and would promote restorative practices. That's what failed communist mayor Bill de Blasio called the holistic approach, restorative justice. Syracuse, New York. Restorative justice practices has caused discipline to absolutely collapse. Teachers regularly complain. Teams are apt to fight, mouth off to teachers, roam the hall under more lenient policy, all of which has put students and staff at risk and make quality instruction absolutely impossible. And what's happening? The majority population, the people who have intact homes and their parents want their children to be brought up in a safe environment at school are fleeing and going to private schools. More power to them, but they're having to pay for the public school system at the same time, fork out much money to go to private school systems. So they're paying for the failing school system at the same time they're having to put their kids in the private schools. It's absolutely upside down is what ought to be taking place. Los Angeles, the on-campus offenses have also spiked after similar policies were implemented. Federal orders came down from that at that time the Obama administration to reduce suspensions of African Americans. Now let's just stop here for a moment. Why does he say reduce suspensions of African American students? The assumption again is that the reason that they're suspended is for systemic racism in the white population, the people who run the schools. But that is absolutely a farce. That is absolutely not true. It's a behavior difference, a behavior gap is what's taking place. Anyway, the Los Angeles United School District has a restorative justice counselor. Orange County, Texas, violent and disrespectful student behaviors seen increasingly as restorative practices have been implemented. So restorative justice increases, and so does disciplinary problems. Santa Ana, California, the same restorative policies have had similar results. Middle-class schools now regularly smoke pot in bathrooms. Some in class, they attack the staff, they spit on teachers, they pelt them with eggs, they threaten to stab them. This goes on everywhere. This kind of thing goes on. Wichita Falls system has their own problems. I've seen many kids tear rooms apart, just destroy the rooms. And no one can do anything about it because, well, we're in the restorative justice thing. Well, we need a talking circle and we need to have them sit down and talk to somebody. We're just so reticent to punish people because, well, we're going to be accused of being racist because, after all, the person who destroyed the classroom was a minority. Same thing is taking place in Philadelphia, Oakland, California, many other places that we can mention. And same thing also right here in the state of Texas. So when we come back, we'll talk about the rest of Heather McDonald's article, and not only is this going on in schools and in the juvenile detention facilities, but this is also exactly what's happening in medical schools, also in law schools, the military, and other places. We'll be back in just a moment. I want to continue here with Heather McDonald's article. What a great thinker she is. Great article regarding the same disparate impact thinking, destroying our civilization. Now, not only regarding what we talked about, juvenile detention and incarceration rates and school disciplinary problems, but Heather McDonald points out many thought that STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, mathematics, would escape the diversity sledgehammer. They were wrong. The American Medical Association today insists that medicine is characterized by white supremacy. Nature magazine declares that science manifests one of humankind's worst excesses, racism. Smithsonian's Institution announces that emphasis on the scientific method and an interest in cause and effect relationships are a part of totalitarian whiteness. Emphasis upon the scientific method is a part of totalitarian whiteness? As a result of this obvious falsehood, we are eviscerating meritocratic behavior standards in accordance with what is known as disparate impact analysis. So she says, consider medicine. Step 1 of the medical licensing exam, taken during or after the second year of medical school, tests medical students' knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and pathology. On average, black students score lower on the grading curve, making it harder for them to land their preferred residencies. Step 1, in other words, has a disparate impact on black medical students. The solution, implemented last year, eliminate Step 1, grading disparity, by instituting a simple pass-fail system. Not going to give them a grade. We've seen this already for the last 15, 20 years at universities, Brown University and so forth, just pass-fail because, after all, there are too many whites, that are passing and too many minorities that are not, excluding, of course, the Asian students. So, step one, eliminate that system and institute a pass-fail system. So hospitals choosing residents can no longer distinguish between high and low achieving students at all. And that, McDonald points out, that's precisely the point. The average medical college achievement test, that's an MCAT, medical college achievement test. The score for black applicants is a standard deviation below the average score of white applicants. Some medical schools, therefore, have waived the submission of MCAT scores altogether for black applicants. We'll just not take it that way. The students, or the tests were already redesigned to eliminate disparity, but now, of course, they're getting rid of or waiving the MCAT score system. A quarter of the questions now focus on social issues, psychology. The medical school curriculum is being revised to offer more classes in white privilege, focus less on clinical practice. The American Association of Medical Colleges will soon require that medical faculty demonstrate knowledge of intersectionality, a theory about the cumulative burdens of discrimination. Heads of medical schools and chairmen of departments like pediatric surgery are being selected on the basis of identity, not knowledge. Well, you know, when a person goes into the hospital and they have a doctor working on them, and if they crack your chest open, you're going to work on your heart. You want the best that there is. You want someone who topped the test and topped the class. You don't want a pass-fail type of system. But this is going to bring everything down. This is exactly the results this is going to have. People are going to avoid this. The federal government is shifting medical research, she writes, funding from pure science to studies on racial disparities, social justice. Federal government shifting money how it wants to shift it. Why? Not because of any assessment of scientific need, but simply because black researchers do more racism research and less pure science. That's why. The National Institute of Health has broadened the criteria for receiving neurology grants to include things like childhood welfare receipt, because considering scientific accomplishment alone results in a disparate impact. So Heather McDonald asked this question: what is at stake in these changes? Future medical progress and ultimately lives, just as I said. You know, when you're on their operating table, you want the best medical student there. You don't care about whether or not they're white or black. But now at this point, you're going to be questioning everybody that comes in that's a minority because, okay, how did they get in here? This is the effect that it's going to have on people's thinking. And ultimately, it's going to affect lives. Standards are falling in the legal profession. Now we move to the legal profession from medicine. And these standards came up with, and this is, by the way, the very field that came up with this disparate impact concept in the first place. Upon taking office in 2021, President Biden announced that he would no longer submit his judicial nominees to the ABA for a preliminary rating. Why? According to a member of the White House counsel's office, allowing the ABA to vet candidates were incompatible with the diversification of the judiciary. The claim, of course, was dubious, and we saw what happened when he appointed a black woman to the Supreme Court. We want you to look like America. It was not about qualifications, about what she looked like. The ABA, after all, cannot open its collective mouth without issuing a bromide about the need to diversify the bar. Its leading members are obsessed with the demographics of corporate law firms and law school faculties. Now, this is the same ABA that gave its highest ratings to a Supreme Court nominee who, as a justice, would make the false claim during a challenge to COVID vaccine mandates that over 100,000 children are in serious condition from COVID and many are on ventilators. Completely false statement, completely false claim. State bar associations are also busy watering down standards to eliminate disparate impact. In 2020, California lowered the pass score on its bar exam. Why? Black applicants were disproportionately failing. So what do? Lower the bar. So now you know, perhaps it is the case, who knows? We have the Kamala Harris's in there from California, and we have black attorneys in different parts of the country, in New York and South Carolina, that are trying to prosecute Trump. Do they know anything about the law? Who knows? Who knows whether they're actually accurate? Who knows whether they're good lawyers or not? Here's the reason they're there: because they're black. Only 5% of black law students, law school graduates, I should say, passed in California on the bar on the first try in February 2020, 5%, compared to 52% of white law school graduates, 42% of Asian law school graduates. So the lack of proportional representation among California's attorneys is held to be proof of discriminatory credentialing system. So what are we going to do? We're going to have to change the test, eliminate the test, admit the minorities simply because they're minority. So the pressure to eliminate, writes McDonald, the law school admission test, the LSAT, requirement for law school admissions is growing also because it too has a disparate impact. A single mother, for example, told an ABA panel, "I would hate to give up on my dream of becoming a lawyer just due to not being able to successfully handle this test." Note the assumption. The problem lies with the test. Never the test taker, always the test. The LSAT requirement will almost certainly be axed. The curious state of our criminal justice system today is a function of the disparate impact principle. If you wonder why police officers are not making certain arrests, or why district attorneys are not prosecuting whole categories of crimes such as shoplifting, trespassing, beatings, it is because the apprehending lawbreakers and prosecuting crimes has a disparate impact on black criminals. Urban leaders have decided that they would rather not enforce the law at all, no matter how constitutional that law enforcement may be, than put more black criminals in jail. And that's what's happening. So, as a result, we look like more and more like Mexico itself. Mexico's coming here to taking California, taking the Southwest as they promised to do for many years, and we're giving it back to them. And so now what's happening? Walgreens, CVS, Target, closing down stores rather than keeping them open. So they're depriving their elderly customers of access to their medications, then confront shoplifters. They rather close the stores than confront shoplifters and hand them over to the law, because doing so would disproportionately yield black shoplifters, as the viral looting videos attest. You see the viral looting videos? Completely this minority populations coming into stores and ransacking stores, whether it be Macy's flagship store in New York, or whether it be a Walgreens or CVS or Target. You have huge gangs of blacks, minorities coming into these stores and destroying those stores. As a matter of fact, Macy's flagship store in New York City was sued several years ago because most of the people its employees stopped for shoplifting were black. The only allowable explanation for that fact was that Macy's must be racist. They're letting the white shoplifters go and they're arresting only the black ones. Because it is not permissible to argue that Macy's arrests mirrored the shoplifting population. This is exactly what we've been talking about for a long time. Even colorblind technology is racist. Speeding, red light cameras disproportionately identify black drivers as traffic scofflaws. The solution to such disparate impact is the same we saw with the medical licensing exam. What is it to do? Throw out the cameras. Now, the result of this de-prosecution, de-policing, has been widespread urban anarchy and, in 2020, the largest one-year spike in homicide in this nation's history. Thousands more black lives have been lost to drive-by shootings. Dozens of black children have been fatally gunned down in their beds, in their front yards, in their parents' cars. No one says their names because their assailants were not police officers or white supremacists. They were other blacks. So here are the uncomfortable facts that Heather McDonald shares. We need to face up to the truth, and the reason for racial underrepresentation across a range of meritocratic fields, that is, fields that demand merit, is the academic skills gap. The reason for racial overrepresentation in the criminal justice system is the crime gap. So you have the academic skills gap and the crime gap. And she says, let me issue a trigger warning here. I'm going to raise uncomfortable facts that many well-intentioned Americans would not or would rather not hear. Keeping such facts off stage may ordinarily be appropriate as a matter of civil etiquette, but it is too late for such forbearance now. If we cannot acknowledge the skills gap and the behavior gap, we're going to continue destroying our civilizational legacy. And let me also make the obvious point that I'm talking about group averages. Thousands of individuals within underperforming groups outperform not only their own group average, but great numbers of people within other groups also. There are great people in all groups, and so it does not necessarily identify every person in that group. But here are the relevant facts. 2019, 66% of all black 12th graders did not pass even partial mastery of basic 12th grade math skills. 66% of all black 12th graders. Basic 12th grade math skills defined as being able to do arithmetic and to read a graph. Could not do it. Only 7% of black 12th graders were proficient in 12th grade math. That would be defined as being able to calculate using ratios. The number of black 12th graders who were advanced in math was too small to show up statistically in a national sample. Let me read that again. The number of black 12th graders who were advanced in math was so small to show up even statistically in a national sample. The picture is not better in reading. 50% of black 12th graders do not possess even partial mastery of basic reading, and only 4% are advanced. According to the ACT, a standardized college admissions test, only 3% of black high school seniors were college ready in 2023. The disparities in other such tests, the SAT, LSAT, the GRE, the GMAT, are just as wide. Remember these data when politicians and others vilify Americans as racist on the grounds that this or that institution is not proportionately diverse. We can argue about why the disparities exist and how to close them, something that policymakers and philanthropists have been trying to do for decades, but in light of the skills gap, it is irrational to expect 13% black representation on a medical school faculty or among the law firm's partners under meritocratic standards. At present, you can have proportional diversity or you can have meritocracy. You cannot have both. That's exactly the same thing regarding the criminal justice system. The bodies speak for themselves. President Biden is fond of intoning that black parents are right to fear that their children will be killed by a police officer or by a white gunslinger every time those children step outside. The mayor of Kansas City proclaimed last year that existing while black is another high-risk activity that blacks must engage in. The mayor is partially right. Existing while black is far more dangerous than existing while white. But the reason is black crime, not white vigilantes. In the post-George Floyd era, black juveniles are shot at 100 times the rate of white juveniles. Blacks between the ages of 10 to 24 are killed in a drive-by shooting at nearly 25 times the rate of whites in the same age cohort. Dozens of blacks are murdered every day, more than all white and Hispanic homicide victims combined, even though blacks are just 13% of the population. But the country turns its eyes away. Who's killing these black victims? Not the police, not whites, but are the blacks. As for interracial violence, blacks are a greater threat to whites than whites are to blacks. Blacks commit 85% of all non-lethal interracial violence between blacks and whites. A black person is 35 times more likely to commit an act of non-lethal violence against a white person than vice versa. That is simply the bold, plain statistic. And yet the national narrative insists on the opposite idea. These crime disparities mean that the police cannot restore law and order in neighborhoods where innocent people are being victimized without having a disparate impact on black criminals. And so the political establishment has decided not to restore law and order at all. And so it is urgent, Heather McDonald urges us, that we fight back against disparate impact thinking. As long as racism remains the only allowable explanation for racial disparities, the left wins. and our civilization will continue to crumble. And even the arts are coming down. Classical music, visual art, theater, all dismissed as a function of white oppression. Metropolitan Museum of Art mounted an astonishing show last year called The Fictions of Emancipation. The show's premise was that if a white artist creates a work intended to show the cruelties of slavery, that artist, in this case the great 19th century French sculptor Jean-Baptiste Carpeaux, is in fact arguing that the natural condition of blacks is slavery. Prosecuting this nonsensical argument required the Met to ignore or distort almost every feature of the Western art tradition, including the representation of a nude human body, artists of models, and the sale of art. Only Western art, isn't it interesting? Only Western art is subjected to this kind of hostile interpretation. Chinese, African, Indian cultural traditions still treated with curatorial respect, but their works are analyzed in accordance with the curator's or the creator's intent. As soon as the critic turns his eye or ear to Western art, however, all they can see or hear is imperialism and white privilege. It's a perverse obsession, and this is the obsession that's absolutely destroying our civilization. We must leave disparate impact thinking, so writes Heather McDonald. What a great article she wrote.